Here's a question. Why is the world so afraid of China's rise? Because if you listen to politicians and media headlines, China is often portrayed as the next great military threat. But here's something most people don't realize. China hasn't fought a major war outside its borders since 1979, nearly 50 years. That's a strange statistic for a country that's supposedly preparing to take over the world. So what's going on here? Economist Jeffrey Sachs argues that the answer lies not just in China's history, but in the history of the West itself. Take a look.
So this rebalancing is happening. He's having a particular tantrum, by the way, because the United States is in a deeply neurotic funk. You know what the cause of that neurosis is? China. A wonderful, brilliant civilization, 4,000 years old plus. It's been a unified state with brilliant statecraft for more than 2,000 years. Unlike Europe, in which every country of Europe fought every other country of Europe every year for 1,000 years. Most of the time, China was peaceful, united. It fragmented temporarily at some points, but it was mainly a unified country that actually, strangely enough, didn't beat up its neighbors also. So China, for 1,000 years, never attacked Japan, for example. Can you imagine Britain couldn't keep its hands off any place for more than a year or two at a time? It had to go beat up somebody. And the United States doesn't even take a year off. So the United States can hardly go a week at a time without trying to kill somebody. But China actually goes centuries without attacking its neighbors. So China went for 1,000 years without once invading Japan, a near neighbor, even though China was much more powerful. Incidentally, from 2 times, there was an attempt to invade Japan from the Chinese mainland, but that was when China had been conquered by the Mongols. So 800 years ago, roughly, they tried twice. The Mongols tried to invade Japan, and they were defeated both times. But the Chinese never tried. The Japanese actually, sadly, invaded China many times, but never the other way around. And the Chinese never invaded Korea. And the Chinese did invade Vietnam once, but that was 615 years ago. And then they had a skirmish for 1 month in 1979. Other than that, that's the so-called enemy of the United States. So that's why I call it a neurosis. China's the least threat possible. Doesn't threaten anybody. Doesn't attack anybody. Hasn't been in any war for 46 years. And the war that it was in 46 years ago lasted 1 month. That's when Vietnam toppled a government in Cambodia that China viewed as an ally. And so it punished Vietnam for a month for having overthrown their ally in Cambodia. Other than that, no wars for more than 4 decades. But we're in a funk because the American idea is you have to be number one so you can boss everyone else around.
What Professor Sachs is arguing here is actually pretty simple. For centuries, the world's most powerful countries became powerful through military strength. The Spanish Empire, the British Empire, the French Empire, and eventually the United States. Power and military force often went hand in hand. The British Empire once controlled nearly a quarter of the world's land area and population. European powers colonized vast portions of Africa, Asia, and the Americas. After World War II, the United States established hundreds of military facilities around the world and became the central pillar of the global security system. Throughout modern history, military power was often seen as the ultimate tool of influence. So, when a new power begins to rise, many people naturally assume the same pattern will repeat itself. The logic seems straightforward. If previous great powers used military dominance to expand their influence, won't China eventually do the same? But this is where the story becomes much more complicated because China's rise has followed a remarkably different path. In 1980, China's economy was smaller than that of several Western countries combined. Large portions of the population still live in poverty. The country was relatively isolated from the global economy. But today, China is the world's second largest economy and the largest trading partner for more than 120 countries. According to World Bank estimates, more than 800 million people in China have been lifted out of extreme poverty over the last few decades. That is one of the largest poverty reduction campaigns in human history. Entire cities have appeared where farmland once stood. High-speed rail networks stretch across the country. China now produces more electric vehicles, solar panels, and batteries than any other nation on Earth. Whether you admire these achievements or not, there is something unusual about them. Most of this rise wasn't achieved through military conquest. It wasn't achieved by occupying foreign countries. It wasn't achieved by acquiring colonies like the West did. It was achieved primarily through manufacturing, trade, infrastructure development, education, and industrial policy. And that raises an important question. Can a country become a superpower without following the traditional path of empire? This question becomes even more interesting when we compare recent history. Since the end of Cold War, the US and its allies have participated in military operations in places such as Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Kosovo, Syria, and elsewhere. Some of these interventions were supported internationally. Others remain highly controversial. The point isn't to judge whether they were right or wrong. The point is that military force remain a central tool of Western foreign policy. At the same time, China was largely directing its resources inward, building infrastructure, attracting investment, and expanding trade relationships across the world. Again, this doesn't mean China is harmless. Far from it. China has territorial disputes. China has tensions with Taiwan. China has disputes in the South China Sea. China has ongoing border disagreements with India. These are real issues, but they are also different from the image of a country constantly launching overseas military campaigns. And that's where perception and reality sometimes begin to diverge. To understand why, we need to look at history, because history shapes expectations. Western expectations about China are often influenced by Western historical experiences. For centuries, European powers expanded outward. They crossed oceans, built colonial empires, controlled shipping routes, and competed relentlessly for territory. These experiences shape the modern understanding of what great powers do. They expand, they dominate, they project power globally. So when many Western observers look at China today, they instinctively expect the same behavior. But China's historical experience is different. For most of its history, Chinese rulers faced a different challenge, managing a vast civilization containing millions of people across enormous territories. Maintaining internal stability was often a bigger priority than overseas expansion. That doesn't mean Chinese dynasties never fought wars. They certainly did. Every major civilization has. But compared to the overseas colonial systems built by European powers, China's historical focus was often directed toward maintaining regional stability and internal cohesion. This difference matters because people often assume that every rising power follows the same script, but history rarely works that neatly. And this brings us back to Jeffrey Sachs' central argument. His claim is not that China is perfect. His claim is not that China has no ambitions. His claim is that many people in the West automatically assume China's future behavior will mirror the behavior of previous Western powers. In other words, they expect China to act the way they themselves acted when they become dominant. And that assumption may be shaping how both sides interpret each other's actions. Today, the world is entering a period of profound change. The economic center of gravity is gradually shifting toward Asia. Countries such as China, India, Indonesia, and others are playing larger roles in global economy. Organizations such as BRICS are gaining influence. The balance of power that defined much of the 20th century is evolving. For some people, this transition feels threatening. For others, it feels long overdue. But regardless of where you stand, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The biggest geopolitical question of the 21st century may not be whether China is rising. That part is already happening. The real question is whether the world can adapt to that rise peacefully. Because if China ultimately follows the historical path of previous great powers, then the fears of conflict may prove justified. But if China continues pursuing influence primarily through economics, trade, and development, then we may be witnessing something history has rarely seen before. A superpower that rose not through conquest, but through commerce. And that possibility challenges one of the deepest assumptions in modern geopolitics, the assumption that power and war must always go together. The future of the international system may depend on whether that assumption turns out to be true. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think the world is genuinely witnessing a new kind of superpower rise? Or is China simply following the same path every major power has taken throughout history? Drop your perspective in the comments. I'm really interested in different views on this. And if you found value in this breakdown, hit like and subscribe for more stories that go deeper than headlines. Thank you for watching.